Thank you for joining us on Fresh Outlook. I'm Frank Cipolla. A very busy week to review, starting with the results of the latest presidential primaries, which seem to have cleared up the picture a bit when it comes to the frontrunners, at least the two main challengers, come November. Voters in 5 states casting ballots this week, with all but one state going to the frontrunners. Joining us to discuss what happens next are Republican strategist Jeanette Hoffman, former Time magazine senior reporter and professor of political science at St. Peter's University in New Jersey, Alain Sanders, and the nation's preeminent political psychologist, Dr. Bart Rossi, and finally, via Skype, is political pundit Rich Rubino. All of you, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're going to start with a very important announcement from Senator Ted Cruz. Take a look.
And the next Vice President of the United States, Carly Fiorina.
What he says, who says what he means, and who keeps his promises.
This is interesting. This is Senator Cruz, who is running second behind Donald Trump, doing something we have never seen, I think, in the political process, at least the presidential process. He's announcing who his running mate will be, even though he does not have a path to the nomination anymore. Good idea? It's either bold or crazy.
It is a Hail Mary pass, or a Hail Carly pass, I should say. I mean, this is historic. I think Donald Trump said this is the first time a candidate who's mathematically eliminated to win the nomination has picked a vice president. But I think, look, everything is focused on Indiana right now for Ted Cruz. If he wins Indiana, then he has a shot of stopping Donald Trump from getting the needed amount of delegates. If not, that's it. He's out. He was endorsed by Indiana Governor Mike Pence this week, which is kind of interesting because it was really a lukewarm endorsement of Ted Cruz.
Left-handed endorsement.
Yeah, it was, he's endorsing Ted Cruz, but then he goes on to say all these great things about Donald Trump. And he really hasn't been out on the campaign trail.
So let me understand this. It's your opinion that if he loses Indiana, Ted Cruz, he's done?
Yes, I would think so.
Professor Sanders.
Yes, well, I think it's interesting. Of course, I agree with you. It's a desperation.
I like where we're using words like interesting. What we really want to say is it's crazy.
It is crazy. It's interesting, but it's also logical in this way. It's a desperation move, no question about it. But it's Ted Cruz going back to his original game plan. If you looked at the way he behaved at the outset of the campaign, his basic strategy was to appeal to conservatives and to evangelicals and to mobilize them, to get them excited. And Carly
how does Carly Fiorina do that?
She's conservative. And he believes that the more conservative the ticket, the more energized will be the supporters of conservatism.
But don't you pick a vice president based on your needs and what you are not?
Absolutely. Right. But I think this is in keeping with his strategy, which was wrong from the outset. But from his standpoint, it's entirely logical. So it is a desperation move, but in some sense, it makes sense within the kind of Cruz mind.
Well, Dr. Rossi, you're a political psychologist, and certainly we need one right now. We need a psychologist. What's going on in Cruz's head?
Well, this is crazy. You're right about that.
Okay.
As a psychologist's point of view. But Cruz is desperate, and he's also shallow in this whole thing. And the psychology of this, to me, is very interesting because Cruz has given Trump a platform to speak about. For example, he's saying that the system is rigged, that the rules are lousy, and Cruz is in the back room stealing delegates. He's right about that. Mm-hmm. Trump may not be right about a lot of things, but he's right about that. And now the psychology of the day is going in Trump's direction. And Cruz is done already. Whatever happens in Indiana, trust me, he's done. Psychologically, he's finished because he has not presented himself well. He's an extremist. He doesn't look good. The Republicans don't even like him. And Trump has the psychology and the momentum in his corner.
All right, now, Jeanette Hoffman, I said before we went on that I feel sorry for you guys. And I do, because you have John Boehner, the former speaker, speaking very poorly about Ted Cruz.
Right.
Calling him an SOB and so on and so forth. You have Lindsey Graham saying he'd rather vote for Hillary, in more words than one, than vote for Ted Cruz. You have Donald Trump, and everybody's trying to stop him, although they're sort of coming around now. Where do we go? Where's this end?
This is just an unpredictable election cycle. I think we can all agree on that. I think Donald Trump is eventually going to be the nominee. And I think Mr. Trump a couple weeks ago basically said to some Republican donors, look, don't worry about it. I'm playing a role in this primary to appeal to conservatives. I am way more moderate and middle of the road when it comes to the general election.
Maybe even liberal, some are saying.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of his past positions,
sure,
he's sided with Hillary Clinton a number of times.
And he grew up in New York. Rich Rubino, political pundit, joining us via Skype. Give us your take on all of this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think the first answer is why not? Why wouldn't Ted Cruz do this? I mean, it is a Hail Mary move. It is a desperation move, but, he's basically mathematically eliminated, so he might as well at least win the news cycle after essentially being shut out the night before. But it's interesting. There is actually precedent for this. Most people are talking about Ronald Reagan picking Governor Schweitzer, picking Senator Schweitzer rather in 1976 as his running mate, and that kind of backfired because a lot of conservatives became incensed that he was willing to do that, and Jesse Helms actually put James Buckley in. A conservative wanted him to run instead on the second ballot. But you go back to 1952. Robert Taft was running against Eisenhower, and Eisenhower was really picking up the momentum. So in a political masterstroke, Taft chose General MacArthur and said General MacArthur would be his running mate. The problem, though, is it became a kangaroo ticket. People said, why shouldn't General MacArthur run instead of the kind of cerebral Taft? So Taft had to make a deal that on the second ballot, he would actually support MacArthur. Now, when this really did not help a candidate, really had deleterious effects. Remember in 1992, former California Governor Jerry Brown chose the Reverend Jesse Jackson as his running mate, essentially at a time before the New York primary when Bill Clinton was about to steamroll to the nomination. And it really hurt him because Jackson made some off-putting comments about the Jewish community when he was running in 1984, and that had hurt him, and he really hadn't healed the wounds. But Jerry Brown basically stuck to his guns and said we need to heal the divide between the Jewish and African-American community. But the point was, though, he was essentially down in the polls at the time. It was a very similitude to this situation. And essentially, though, Jerry Brown only won 9% of the Jewish community vote in New York State. And then after that, Bill Clinton essentially steamrolled to the nomination. So there's precedent for it, but the short answer is, why wouldn't he do it?
All right. Getting back to the in-studio panel, also of discussion this week was Donald Trump's comments about women and Hillary Clinton's response. Let's take a look at some of the video from that. Again, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton talking about the women vote.
For a man, I don't think she'd get 5% of the vote. The only thing she's got going is the woman's card, and the beautiful thing is women don't like her.
If fighting for women's health care and paid family leave and equal pay is playing the woman card, then deal me in.
They did an autopsy following the last election, and they came to the determination, of Republicans said, that they needed Hispanics and they needed more women voters and so on. This is the antithesis of what they wanted, and it's getting worse.
Well, here's the thing. With Donald Trump saying that remark, that really is red meat to the conservative voters right now who don't like Hillary Clinton.
So you think he's going to pivot?
I think he's going to pivot, but he's got to be careful because some of these comments can come back to haunt him in the general election where he needs to attract more soccer moms, more women.
Professor Sanders, they certainly will.
Sure, I think not some of these comments. I think all of the comments will come back to haunt him. And of course, Hillary Clinton has adopted the right position. If you were paying attention to her campaign, she's now issuing women's cards. Mm-hmm. She's soliciting donations by giving out cards that look like a credit card that say women's card. And that's the right approach. That is to say, when you are accused of something, turn it around and make it positive and aggressive. Well, and she's doing the right thing on that.
I'm not a psychologist, but I'm guessing that Donald Trump is a megalomaniac. Would that be a good?
Probably a good comment.
And why would he do this, knowing that eventually he has to pivot and grab the women's vote? That little clip there is probably going to be in every Hillary Clinton commercial.
A couple of reasons. He is an abrasive personality. That's who he is. He's confrontational, but also, he is an authoritarian person appealing to a sector in the Republican Party. That's all he's really got. He doesn't have that much support in this nation. And he's disassociated himself from women, gays, minorities, immigrants, and everybody who believes in climate change. Well, they're part of some liberal hoax. Well, this is not going to work. He is winning the primary season for sure, marketing himself. At the same time, he's losing the general election. He's probably lost the general election already, and we're not even in that cycle.
I want to go to Rich Rubino. Hold on just a second. Does a candidate like this have the chance to pivot toward the center, Rich Rubino, and make this happen? Or has he gone too far right? Or in some cases, his candidates have gone too far left and then come back to the center too late?
Well, what's interesting about Donald Trump is he is really an ideologically heterogeneous candidate. You look at issues, some foreign policy, for example, he says he was against the war in Iraq from the start. In many respects, he can actually outflank Hillary on the left on that issue. On the issue of foreign trade, he's basically a economic nationalist. He wants to put a 45% tariff on Chinese goods. That's essentially right out of Bernie Sanders' playbook. So he's really kind of all over the place. Where it's not so much that he's conservative. I think it's the more of the abrasive analogy more apt. I think people are more afraid, do you want to give this guy the nuclear codes? Will this guy use nuclear weapons in Europe? And he talked about, what he said about, he said he would not rule it out necessarily, but you talk about what he said about Hillary Clinton playing the woman's card. Remember, with Donald Trump, this is not, a very calculated politician. This is not a Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama or a Gerald Ford or anybody else. He's a Donald Trump Republican. He's unprecedented in that respect because he doesn't play by the rules, which essentially says, well, I don't want to offend this group, I don't want to offend this group. He's essentially telling it at least what he thinks that his constituency thinks is telling it like it is. And, right now he's getting about 35% of the Republican vote in all these primaries. Remember, he's very rarely getting a majority in many of these states. So
all right, let me stop you just there for just a moment. We're going to talk about Donald Trump again. Before we do, let's cover Bernie Sanders as well. And John Kasich has just been, he has that aw shucks sort of thing, going, and I'll be here in case you need me. Almost like the woman in the rom-com when he realizes that he was there all along. You know what I'm saying? So let's discuss John Kasich real quick. Why hasn't he, well, they've made a pact, he and Ted Cruz, to keep out of summary. But is he still viable as well? He clearly has no way of winning this.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I don't think so. I think John Kasich is a great candidate, but just not this year. This is the year of the outsider. This is the year of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders.
And he's too much of the insider.
He's too much of an insider, but I think he's very viable as a vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump.
And maybe that's why he's hanging around.
And I think he's run a really positive campaign and talked about a lot of positive issues, and I think he would complement Donald's weaknesses very well.
As long as Chris Christie doesn't step in the way.
Yeah, well, I think Kasich is in the race and staying in the race because he believes he has a political future, perhaps not the presidency, but a political future. I'm not sure he would accept a ticket on Donald Trump because that ticket is very shaky, and I don't think he would want to go down to defeat again. But if you want to bring up Bernie Sanders, he has won, as I've said. He's won for a long time. That is to say, he's brought the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton to the left, which was his major objective, and he has accomplished that, and he will get a respected part at the convention, and he will have a respected position when he goes back to the Senate.
All right, let's talk about Hillary Clinton. I find it odd that she cannot dispatch a 74-year-old self-avowed socialist, and here we are almost toward the end of the primary season, and Bernie Sanders is still there.
Listen, Bernie did win. Trump dominated this whole primary season, that's for sure. But Bernie won in many respects, and he did it with an authentic personality. He's a real guy, and he's very believable, and wealth only to the wealthy, and wealthy can only afford education. Come on. And tax breaks, well, they only go to the wealthy. He makes more sense than most anybody. But the thing is that Hillary is going to look like Bernie. I say that maybe she should buy some of his old suits because she's going to have to wear that. She's going to have to look really like Bernie as she goes forward. And I think she's going to do that, and I think that Bernie has made her a much stronger candidate. When this primary process is over, Hillary will look better because of Bernie.
All right, let's start with Rich Rubino and work our way back. Rich, do you see a brokered convention, or does Trump have this in the bag now?
My guess is he probably has it in the bag for the simple reason, even if he doesn't get to the 1237, I think that there is a lot of trepidation among the Republican Party right now that there is going to be essentially, riots on the streets, as Donald Trump has actually said there might be. Go back to 1968 when Hubert Humphrey garnered the Democratic Party nomination with only participating in one primary, South Dakota, which he lost. And a lot of Eugene McCarthy supporters were out in front, protesting, and as a result, Hubert Humphrey probably lost that election. I think in many respects, if anything at all, I think the Republicans might just decide to give the election to Donald Trump and then in a sense almost forfeit and wait for 2020 and really work on their down ballot candidates. Remember that in 1964 when Barry Goldwater won the nomination, and he got creamed, he only won 6 states. In 1966, the Republican Party picked up about 47 seats. The same thing that George McGovern loses in 72. By 74, they're picking up seats. So I think they're looking to 2018 and 2020 right now.
Rich, we've run out of time. We thank you so much for joining us. Let's go back to the panel. We have about a minute and a half. Do we have a brokered convention here?
No, I don't think so. For the reasons that Rich mentioned, I think it would just be outrage and bedlam, and there's no one establishment candidate for everyone to get behind. So I think Trump's going to take it.
Is there anybody here that thinks there'll be a brokered convention?
Well, it's always up in the air. It's likely not, but whether it is brokered or unbrokered, I think it's going to be quite an event, and there will be lots of demonstrations outside as well as inside.
No, not a brokered convention because of the psychology of the day. Trump is the winner. He has won the psychology. The momentum is on his side. Even if he doesn't get to 1237 exactly, you can't deny his movement and all of those supporters. And as rabid as they are, he's won. And look at the psychology, not just the numbers on this.
All right, Jeanette, I'm going to give you the last word, 15 seconds. If you were his campaign manager, Donald Trump, how do you sell him now to the nation?
I would talk about his business experience and talk about common sense, making America great again, and real talk to real people.
All right. Thank you very much, Rich Rubino, as well via Skype.
Yep.
When Fresh Outlook continues, the always contentious subject of taxes in America. We'll be right back.